Okay, looks like it's at least 6:30 by the clock on the wall. My phone says it's maybe even a little bit past 6:30, so we'll call this meeting to order of the ELEC Committee for August 9th, 2018, and ask for the roll to be called, please.
Petrie,
Present.
Furtado, Goss, Patterson, Esri.
Here, we do have a quorum. I know Mr. Goss was going to be gone tonight. I'm not sure what he was doing, but okay, move on then to approval of agenda and addenda. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Patterson. Due to some changes, we're gonna, when we get to 9A, we aren't really gonna take action on that tonight. So we're basically, you could say pulling as an action item, but we're still gonna discuss it at that time. So we won't need a motion or take action on it because there's been some changes there that we're gonna discuss. So to make everyone aware of that. So all in favor with that change, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passes. We'll move on then to approval of minutes from the ELEC Committee meeting July 5th, 2018. Moved by Ms. Petrie, seconded by Mr. Patterson. Are there any changes that anybody's seen or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passes. Public participation, as of right now, I have 3 slips turned in. Remind you that we've ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Also, if you would, maybe at least state your name for the audience or record when you come up. The first name I have is Ms. Tiffany McElroy Smetzer. The public participation is at the beginning, but this committee, when I've been running, we have been a little bit lax. If someone wants to, flexible. Yeah, that's probably a better word. But with taking comments from the public when we've got to those action items. We need to probably have this conversation. If you have something that you need to say to us, why don't you say it now? And then if you can stick around, we'll very likely let you speak again later on, please. Sure, but yeah, this would be the time to say it, so for sure. And the microphone will need to be turned on. You could leave it on for the next person. It's the closest button to you. There you go.
Okay. My name's Tiffany McElroy Smetzer. I live in St. Joseph. My mother and my father's trust are co-owners of land that's being looked at for being leased for the solar farm. I missed the last ELEC meeting. I apologize. But there are just a few things that came up through the zoning meeting that I think are important to touch on quickly. My mom isn't sold on the idea, but if she feels very strongly about farmland. It's a centennial farm. It's important. It had been broken up by our family into like 8 pieces, and my mom and dad bought it all back. So agriculture is very important. I was on the land use management, committee. It is important, and we understand how important farmland is, but I also think that property owners' rights are also important. None of us are granted perfect neighbors. I keep hearing complaints about, well, do you want that next door to you? As I told the zoning board, my mom has lived in our house for 50-some years, and she has a gas station, 2 gas stations across the street from her now. She was in a residential neighborhood, so you're never promised anything, but I do think that if we take some actions to help reduce the annoyance, that I don't see why a solar farm couldn't be a good neighbor. People are complaining that this is prime farmland. Yes, it's some of the richest farmland in the world. This is also important to my mother. One of the things that she doesn't mind about the solar farm is that it isn't destroying the land. For the years that the solar land would be there, it's conserving the natural resources of the land. I do understand protecting the farmland. As I said, I served on the county's Land Resource Management Plan Steering Committee for several years. I didn't get paid to serve on this committee. I did it because farmland is important to me and to my family. I hear at this point, I was getting very frustrated with the zoning board process, and not by the zoning board members, but just, you know how the process goes. I'm the village clerk in St. Joe. You get frustrated when things go on and on and on. A property owner, it just seemed like we were being asked to have rules to satisfy every single person for a 15-mile range. At some point, isn't it enough? A property owner should not have to satisfy everybody with a 15-mile radius. I know that's an exaggeration, but it almost seemed like that's the hoops that the solar farms were being asked to jump through. I'm asking that you don't make requirements so stringent that the property owners and developers will find it unreasonable and unable to proceed with any plans. Please remember, each foot you are putting in a setback is a restriction in income to the property owners like my mother and her neighbors. I've heard complaints about the noise. I'm not sure where these people are located, but this is a loud area. At least my mom's property is. There are 2 busy rail lines, the village, the Frito-Lay plant, and farm equipment. Mr. Hart, when I talked to him personally, he has some really good ideas about sound management. And I do think that sound management should be taken into consideration. I'm not sure that giving up feet, a designated set of feet, would necessarily achieve what the sound that would be desired. I think that other methods should be looked into instead of just land designation. I also heard board members and many people in the audience say that property owners were making a lot of money off of this. This was really annoying. It's irrelevant to the regulations that should be discussed. My mother and I don't ask how much people make at their jobs. We don't tell them that they can't take higher paying jobs. It's the property owner's business exclusively. And again, as far as the looks of the property, my mom wants to be a good neighbor, but some of the comments were overbearing. We don't go to every property owner and tell them how to cut their grass, how to paint their homes, how many cars and pieces of equipment can be in the yard. It's her property. It's been in our property and our family for 100 plus years. At some point, I think that should entitle her and the other property owners to make some decisions about what should be done with it. In the end, it is my mom's decision to do whether she signs or not with the company. Our only request is that you think of the property owners as individuals and not some big company here to make big bucks. We would like the regulations to be fair enough that if she were to choose to get into the contract, that it would be beneficial to her and to the developers. Thank you for everybody that spent all the time on this. I know, Aaron, I've seen you at the meetings. I know you've all spent a lot of time on this, and by no means is this any criticism of this board, the zoning board, or any other board. It's just that I think these things need to be said. We hear, and I think the people's concerns need to be heard. I think there's a happy medium that doesn't mean you don't have the plant, a solar plant, and it also doesn't mean you put it up right against the town where they have no room to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Mr. Patrick Brown.
Good evening, Patrick Brown, Baywa Renewables, office in 17901, Irvine, California. It's a pleasure to be here again tonight. We're all here again. I'm hoping tonight this committee finds a way to move this ordinance forward. It's had a tremendous amount of work put into it by all sides, stakeholders, interested folks, folks trying to make a change. So I believe that it's ready to go to the county board. I think it's had a lot of thought put into it. Mr. Hall's put a lot of effort into it and his staff. I think it's taken an enormous amount of the county's time to get to this point. So we're, as industry, we're supportive of it as it is. I believe the changes the zoning administrator made to his recommendations on the letters of credit versus the escrow account, the new information tonight, I think it's well-founded. And I think an example that I did forward on that a big organization like PJM in the East Coast regional transmission operator accepts letters of credit for multi-million dollars worth of security, sometimes 20 million, 50 million. They'll accept a letter of credit as long as they meet the minimum standards and credit rating. I think I think the county will be well protected in any event that something were to default. That's it. We support it. We'd like to see that change made, and I think it would be a home run, and you'll start to see that the developers will start coming forward with their permits. So thank you very much tonight. I'm here, as always, for questions if the committee needs any. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Last I have right now is Mr. Ted Harkey.
Magdalene. My name's Ted Harkey. I live at 1183 County Road, 2300 East, Sydney, Illinois. I want y'all to pull up the first sheet. It has a tan box on it. The first sheet with the tan box is an evaluation of the sound level of the solar panel inverter that's planned for the project near Sydney. There are 66 decibels at 10 meters away. At 740 feet, they'll be at 38.93. So let's say it's 39 decibels at 740 feet. The effects of outdoor audible sound is that the World Health Organization says there's almost no significant effects predicted at 39 decibels or lower. However, there's a sharp increase in adverse health effects predicted in the 40 to 55 decibel range. Acoustician Stephen Ambrose, if you go to what I have is page 3, which is the very colorful orange and red charts. Steve Ambrose has on this chart here shows the adverse health effects beginning at 40 dBA. And on the community response chart, if you want to look at the bottom one, I have highlighted health effects begin at 40 dBA. And then on the bottom edge, it shows how widespread complaints begin at 33.5 dBA. Now this is for constant noise that's all day long, not just a passing car or a barking dog or snoring. This is all day long noise for long periods of time. So back to my front page. So for solar panels to not harm the neighbors, the solar panel inverters should be placed 740 feet from unleased property. That lets my family and all the landowners who have not been paid and they're not making any money off the deal, that lets us keep what we already have and use our property for legal purposes. That's for private, our own use. The Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations, which are in your ordinance now, they have a very high limit. John Hall, during the proceedings, said that it's too high. He admitted it was too high of a noise limit, and I don't understand what the holdup is, why we can't lower it to 39 for constant noise that's all day. Iroquois County put in 30 decibels at night and 35 in a day. I'm only asking for 39. If you go to page 2, it's mostly this white page. This is stuff from Boone County, Illinois. They're working on their solar inverter and wind turbine noise research findings. On the left-hand column is a presentation from New Jersey State Ag Development, and it says that for solar energy generation systems must be designed to comply with either of the following standards. Sound level cannot exceed 40 dBA, measured from any point of the property line, and sound level cannot exceed ambient sound. Well, I guess if we have a really noisy area, you can go ahead and exceed the 39 because it's already noisy. That's what I think that basis is about. So we look up a Chinese sun-grow inverter on the manual. For the inverter manual from the manufacturer, it says, do not install the inverter near residential areas. Noise can be produced during inverter operation, which may affect daily life. And then Dr. Paul Schomer, he wrote the Illinois Pollution Control Board standards as a grad student. He's the last living member that is still alive today that contributed to write those noise standards. He says, a constant 24-hour level of 39 decibels calculates to a 45 dB. That's an ISO standard connection that relates it back to Illinois Pollution Control Board noise limits. Okay. I am a surveyor. I totally get that people own and can enjoy and use all of their land. And I totally get it that I should not be telling people what color their house should be or whatever. But if you're going to do something on your land that you host, and someone comes on your land and they do activities, and it harms the neighbor, that's where they've trespassed and caused the problem. I think that the inverters within a solar farm, this is a 100% predictable thing to know what the noise level is going to be at the edge of the fence, at the property line. And this is 100% preventable. If they want to have their inverters closer to the property line, they can. Just put a little cabinet around it to cover the noise. If they want to be safe and they want to give the extra distance, all you have to do is keep an inverter 500 feet from their perimeter fence. As long as it's 740 feet from an unleased parcel, I feel like you're going to have good luck. In previous meetings, I was advocating for 800 feet. I did some more math and thinking today, I think maybe 740 feet is going to be okay, because typically people don't spend all their time on the property line. And I'm out of time. I'll just wrap it up. Are there any questions?
Or do you want to wait until, Patsy, do you want to wait until later? Or are you going to stick around?
Staying.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Okay, Mr. Stuart Levy.
Hi, I'm Stuart Levy. I live in Champaign, and I'm a volunteer with the Sierra Club. So I guess I'm going to say some things that you might expect the Sierra Club to say. So I'm drawing on things that were put together by others, but I think but they sound reasonable to me, so I'm happy to present them to you. Of the things that went into the zoning ordinance, a lot of them seem reasonable. One issue of concern seems to be the requirement of an escrow account in particular, as opposed to a letter of credit for holding money over the long term, so that there will be money around for dismantling the solar array in decades when it's finished. So one suggestion, which I guess passed by a narrow margin in the zoning board commission, is to, well, let me see. I don't know if it's worth my saying this directly, but the point is to allow to not necessarily require an escrow account unless the letter of credit is insufficient. Because that could increase the cost to people who were trying to do this by a factor of 6 or 7, and that might well mean that people who would otherwise want to set up a solar farm in this county would just decide to go elsewhere. So that's a big deal. The other big deal is that the provision for special arrangements for the roads, which makes a lot of sense for a wind farm where they're moving in extremely heavy things, is not nearly so important for, at least for small solar farms. It might be a bigger deal for the large ones, like we all know is proposed. But to require that of every solar farm when they're not moving in, 75-ton chunks of material is a big burden on a modest-sized solar farm. The other part of this story is to say something about what we could hope for economic benefits to not only to the landowners who might be leasing their land over the long term to people who'd want to set up solar farms, but also to the county. So there's a Senate bill, I'm not sure whether it got signed, but it at least went to the governor, that sets a property tax value for a solar farm, and as initially $218,000 per megawatt, and that gets depreciated. But anyhow, over the long term, for a big thing like is proposed. I'm sorry, there, all right. So it could amount to an addition in assessed value beyond the value of the farmland of about $20 million for the large solar farm, and of about $1 million for a handful of smaller solar farms that are proposed. So $20 million in additional assessed value would be a substantial boon to the county's tax base. So in saying, please don't make this too onerous, it's important not just to the landowners who would like to have solar farms, it's not just important to people in the county who'd like to be using solar energy and to benefit from having solar energy collected in our area. It's also a benefit to the cash-strapped county, or so we can expect. Let's see. Maybe I'll stop with that, but thank you for your attention, and I hope you can find a good resolution.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to speak tonight? Seeing none, we will close that then and move on to communications. Any communications from the committee members or Mr. Weibel? Seeing none, we will move on then to line item 7 for information only. We have A, the Mahama Aquifer Protection Task Force update. Ms. Susan Monte, please.
Hi. This Monday, the task force, both task forces and the full committee of this protection task force met in Rantoul, and they're speeding along, the subcommittees are, because they are trying to meet a late September deadline to collect information about identifying actions that might be taken to ensure the long-term protection of the Mahama Aquifer, and the other subcommittee is identifying potential and current contamination threats to the water quality of the aquifer. So there's a lot of distilling of recommendations that are being made as we speak. The next meeting will occur 2 weeks from this Monday on August 20th. The location has yet to be announced, but yeah, if you have concerns and know any of the task force members, you can access the recommendations and information sources that are being referred to at the URL that you have provided to you, and you are free to contact any of the persons that you may know on that task force with your concerns or requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Ms. Petrie?
Okay, a couple of additions to what Susan is reporting. They're going to shift the emphasis, the work emphasis from the task force to committees A and B, and so those meetings are going to be much longer than they have been previously to move along, as Susan indicated, and our fellow county board member Chris Storr gave a presentation on Monday concerning aspects of the aquifer and the importance of the protection of the aquifer. And fortunately, Susan provided those PowerPoint slides, so that was helpful as he did his presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. Further discussion, comments? Seeing none. Thank you for that, Susan. And we will move on then to B, Senate Bill 1597, which creates the Carryout Bag Fee Act. Ms. Monte?
Okay, so I do think it's important that you're aware of the Senate bill, which will be returning to the veto session this fall. I am still preparing the handout. I'm trying to make it so that it's easy to understand, and I have defined terms now, and I have all of the concerns that the city of Champaign had expressed back in 2012 when they looked at a similar kind of effort. So the handout is not yet ready, and I will distribute it soon. I need to complete it within a week for another purpose, so I will email all ELUC members about this.
Ms. Petrie?
Can you remind us what were the city of Champaign concerns back in 2012?
Sure. Well, I would like to provide you with a written summary of those concerns. They thought of every possible problem that could be encountered, and they did have broad public support. They did a survey of the community, and 60% of respondents were in support of either an ordinance to regulate the use of plastic bags or to issue a fee for use of plastic bags. So they did find that there was broad community support for this kind of a thing, but they didn't resolve the problems of recycling of such bags. And this bill has a similar kind of issue, and I would prefer to wait to present those concerns in a more coherent fashion. I keep using the word coherent when I talk about this bill because I don't want to confuse anyone.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Just because I'm not familiar with the bill, does the bill mandate the fee or allow for the fee?
Okay, so the bill will require the fee, and the fee will create a new fund in the state treasury, which can be used by counties for their needs with regard to implementing their solid waste management plan. Here in Champaign County, that would be a wonderful source of revenue for household hazardous waste collection, for example.
Further discussion? Thank you again, Susan. And we'll move on then to C, additional ordinances, additional staffing, and alternative approaches to improve enforcement. Mr. Hall?
I had hoped to get a handout prepared, sort of in response to some of the concerns of the Scottswood residents that have been at the past couple of meetings. Something unexpected came up this week that literally absorbed all my time. And it relates to the RPC contract, and in fact, sort of relates to this item, and we'll discuss that later on the agenda. I would hope to be able to bring this back because there might be some ways to make some incremental improvements in speed of enforcement. But when it comes right down to it, you know, we're asking for people to change the way they're doing things, and it just takes a very long time to convince some people that, you know, we will take you to court if you do not change your behavior. And even once you go to court, the judges tend to allow a lot of time for people to make these changes. So I know we cannot match the speed of enforcement that the folks who have been here the past few meetings would like to see. I believe we may be able to make some improvements, and that's why I hope to have this memo probably at October, because the item that has consumed my time this week will require me to prepare other things for September. So October may be the next opportunity, but if I can fit it in for September, I certainly will.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Yeah, it is on the agenda, so without a handout from Mr. Hall, I'm thinking we don't necessarily need to go into a super deep discussion, but we can discuss it some. So, Ms. Petrie?
In your memo, are you planning to make any suggestions that would address the citizens of the Scottswood area in particular that we can do to tighten up our ordinances to cut down the amount of delay time to get things done? Because my sense is that's one of their biggest foci, when they come and talk to us, that somebody's told to do something and it doesn't get done, and where is that leverage point? So,
I predict that will result in sending a greater number of cases to the state's attorney's office, and we tell all of our violators that just because we're referring it to the state's attorney, you shouldn't stop trying to correct this. And so I don't think we're going to provide the speed of finality that the complainants in Scottswood want. But again, I think we can make some incremental improvements. And I think that as we get harsher with our enforcement, which is what we're talking about, getting harsher, as we get harsher and neighbors find out that the county really means these things, you know, that's bound to improve the time that people decide that, okay, I really do have to comply. So I think we've already seen some improvement, but I just can't stress how much these people think they have an excuse for having these problems, and it takes a lot of time and talking, a lot of time and listening to convince them that they really have to change. So, and I don't, Jamie and I have identified a couple of improvements to our ordinances that would be helpful, but I don't believe those improvements will make huge dramatic differences. For example, I don't think we can add a mowing the yard type ordinance if other things aren't involved. I think we can add a mowing the yard type ordinance if there's junk and debris in the tall weeds. I mean, our current approach is you have to mow the weeds in order to make sure all the junk and debris is gone. Lately, we've decided, you know, maybe we should have a mowing the yard ordinance for lots on which no one resides, because that is one of our common problems. When someone leaves a house, they don't take care of the yard. So we could make that a violation. I don't think we can make a violation having an unmown yard if someone lives there and that's the yard they choose to have. I think that is too difficult for us to do. We're always looking for examples, but I haven't yet found a good example. I don't think it would behoove the county to adopt, you know, a managed landscape ordinance. But again, if the committee thinks something like that would be necessary, we're happy to investigate it a little more substantially. But it's something I look for when I have time, and I really haven't seen anything yet. So anyhow, this is a combination of maybe making minor ordinance changes, maybe changing how long we take for the notice process, which ironically we increased back around the turn of the century because people were complaining that we were being too harsh. So maybe we've come full circle. And lastly, there is this possibility of using a hearing officer, but I have not yet found an example of a county that uses a hearing officer in conjunction with the kinds of regulations that we have in our nuisance ordinance. There's several examples of hearing officers for zoning ordinance violations, but no examples of nuisance ordinance. We're one of the few counties to have a nuisance ordinance, so I will review that briefly in this upcoming memo, but you know, it's hard to say whether that would have any real great benefit. Again, I think the main benefit of a hearing officer approach is it gets the word out there that there will be fines if you don't change these problems. But it does add, it takes a lot of staff to man. It requires having, I think, having attorneys on a retainer basis so that you're paying attorney costs. Those attorneys can't be in the state's attorney's office. Some state's attorneys don't like it for that reason. I have asked our own state's attorney, I've made them aware that something like that might be discussed. I haven't heard anything from the state's attorney's office yet. So I hope the committee can have a good discussion on this in October, if not September.
Go ahead,
I have a
Patsy.
couple of more things that I want to be sure that you're considering. There are plenty of examples of height of grass ordinances that are not hard to implement. If you can't find a hearing officer model or example in a county, there are plenty in the cities. So that is another option. And previously, I had brought to the attention and question about the county offering once a year neighborhood dumpster where people can know that it's coming, and maybe twice a year the first year, just to help clean up things at a speedier time, and for a very short period of time, because part of what was mentioned is if it's there too long, there will be many more interesting things in the dumpster than expected. So, you know, Friday morning at 8 o'clock, pick up at 8 o'clock Monday morning. They know when it's coming. All right, thanks.
Ms. Furtado.
John, looking at your list, you talked about staff and maybe like reallocating staff or rethinking about staff, but I know that has been brought up that just like a lot of things in the county, you're short-staffed. And so I want to make sure that we're having this conversation in conjunction with finance, because we're about to go right into the budgeting process. So if this memo, I know that Patsy's brought up the need for an additional planner. I know that our budget is tight, but if we're going to have any conversation about that, we would need to be having it before October. Obviously, we'd be, one of the ways we're approaching some of this stuff with the budget is having like decision points that, we might not get there, but at least as we'd be having the conversation, if we can't address it this year, addressing it in the future, like as we talked about yesterday, Patsy. So I don't know, how does that work with this?
Yeah, we can't reallocate staff hours. Our staff hours are 100% used the way they are. It is true that additional staffing, I mean, if the county board, you've heard these complaints of the Scottswood residents. If that is sufficient justification to add staffing would definitely help. Now, this goes back to what we'll be discussing later on this agenda. I think we're going to get a little extra staffing in 2019. Emphasis on little. It's not going to be like adding a whole new staff person to help with enforcement. Probably more like a quarter to a half of a staff person. So there's going to be a lot of changes made in our department for 2019. And so these things that talk about adding staff, I don't think there's enough time in this budget year to get that all thought out. So in a way, what we're going to discuss later on this agenda will actually be a big help, even though it's not going to be like a whole new staff person.
Thank you.
Further discussion on this topic? Seeing none, we will then move on to 8 items to be approved by the committee. And we have A, annual renewal for recreation and entertainment license. Last call for Alcohol Incorporated for bands DJ at 105 Main Street, Penfield, from 7/11/2018 to 12/31/2018. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie. Seconded by Mr. Patterson. Discussion. This is one that we've seen yearly. Go ahead, Patsy.
Just a clarification, it's going from July to December. Is there a reason that we didn't do something? Okay, John, you're on.
Yeah, the annual R&E license period is from January 1 to December 31. I don't know why we got this so late. I know that even the liquor license, well, the liquor license was there, so I can't explain that. I just know that some of our R&E applicants, it's clear the R&E renewal is not the first or second thing on their mind for a year. So I'm happy we have it before you now, though.
Okay, then I have another question. Is there some way that you could interlock the liquor renewal and the R&E license so it isn't split like this? And it sort of comes into double handling for your office, and you could maybe reduce some of that aspect.
I think the only way you could do that would be to establish similar permit periods, you know, the permit time. And if you, in doing that, if you could make it easier on the applicant so that they could submit one single application, then you might be successful, because clearly having that liquor license is much more important than having the R&E license. That would require redoing probably both licenses. And again, I don't think you can condition one on the other, because they are, yeah.
It was locking them together, because you're right, the liquor license is.
Microphone, Patsy, if you're good.
You're right, the liquor license is the leverage point.
But I have to say, that sounds like a good idea. I have to believe most applicants would probably appreciate that if it was indeed causing less work on their part. But again, you'd have to rewrite the ordinances, so that would involve the clerk. That sounds like a good idea. And I would suggest that that rewriting should be done by the state's attorney's office. And since we're still without our civil state's attorney, you know, we'd have to get someone on board first. Yep. But I will mention that to the state's attorney's office and the clerk.
Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you, that passes. We'll then move on to B, Recreation and Entertainment License, Row Crop LLC, also known as the Luke Bryan Concert for live bands at the field at 9:30, County Road 300 North, Pasodum, for September 26th, 2018. Is there a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie, seconded by Ms. Furtado. Discussion on this, or Mr. Hall?
I put at each desk a color photocopy of the larger so-called site plan for this, this field concert. It's about an 80-acre part of, I think, a 160-acre tract, literally right next to the village of Pasodum. If you see that low area in the lower right-hand corner, that's right next to the village of Pasodum. The sheriff's office has been coordinating with the highway district, the fire protection district, and other jurisdictions since April on this. So the little blow-up that was in the license application is that sort of small area on this plan. You cannot read these notes, but I do know they've been working with the sheriff's office at coordinating at great lengths, and on the traffic and parking, yeah, this is, again, being next to the village of Pasodum, it's only about a mile off of the interstate. There was a concern about literally backing up traffic when you, all these lines on the right-hand side here, that's the parking with a 20,000 attendance, which probably will be 20,000. That's it's about 5,000 parking spaces, and so this is a huge thing. We hope it goes well. I'm sure it will draw the full 20,000 attendance. And the sheriff's office has signed off on the R&E application.
Discussion. Mr. Weibel?
I'm assuming that there's no infrastructure out there, that's all temporary. Is that true?
That's correct.
Are they going to, where's the electricity come from? Generators on site?
I would imagine.
Okay. We're going to must have a bunch of them.
Well, those blue rectangles are all the semi-trailers.
That's probably just costumes.
Ms. Petrie?
Well, when this was before us previously, there were some issues raised about the ADA access and
That was just at the agenda meeting.
What?
This hasn't been before us, Pat. It's
Oh, I
just, it was at the agenda
Oh,
meeting. We
sorry.
were talking
Okay.
somewhat about that, I think.
all right. So
But go ahead.
how is that being accommodated then? I'll change how I say it.
Well, I still have that concern. We have given the Luke Bryan concert team the contact info for the Attorney General's office that enforces the accessibility code and the ADA also. Obviously, because of ADA, they encounter accessibility concerns at every one of their in-field concerts. And we have raised this issue with them, and they're comfortable that they're dealing with it adequately. So that's all I can do. And the response I got from the Attorney General's office, by the way, when I forwarded this, or actually the Capital Development Board for the Accessibility Code, they seem to be comfortable with these accommodations. So I don't think there's going to be a problem. I wouldn't have approved it, but I asked the Capital Development Board and the Attorney General's office, and they're satisfied. So.
Well, according to the statistics that you've given us, and so a quarter of those potential attendees will be parking here in the field, and 3/4 are going to have to traverse quite a distance to get to the field. So I have a little problem figuring out how that's going to be totally accommodated.
Yeah, I don't see how that's accessible, but I've raised the issue and been told that it's okay.
Mr. Patterson?
I guess what is the run-of-the-mill ratio usually between spots and expected attendees?
Our zoning ordinance has a ratio of 1 to 5. So, and as you can see, they could accommodate probably 100% of overflow parking if necessary. So they really do have a lot of land to work with. And I think the main concern of the sheriff is literally just getting the traffic there in an efficient manner.
Are you talking about ADA parking 1 to 5?
I understood Mr. Patterson's question just to be about parking in general.
Yeah, you made reference, I think, Patsy, you made reference to there being, the amount of spots is not the same.
Well,
as
they said that this would accommodate about 5,000, these lines, and then they're expecting about 20,000. And that's why I had that question, where the rest are going and about the ADA.
Mr. Weibel?
Having attended shows like this, not necessarily this flavor of music, but what I've seen is that they do have parking for ADA parking, and they generally have golf carts that will take people from the cars right to the sites. We're obviously close to where the music's being played. That's generally how they handle it.
Yeah.
Now, I've not experienced that myself yet.
That's what I would have expected.
Yeah.
But I'm not aware golf carts will be available. But they will have plenty of accessible parking.
I believe Pasonum has a golf cart ordinance, so maybe let's get them from the village.
Maybe there's a potential there for some income.
There you go.
Further discussion on this? Oh, Mr. Patterson?
Could you speak to any sort of security requirements, or if there's going to be additional law enforcement agencies involved?
There will be several law enforcement agencies, and the Luke Bryan company provides their own security for, within the performance area. So luckily, I was not party to any of those discussions, but I know the sheriff's office is very satisfied with the performance of the Luke Bryan team regarding this. By the way, the health department will be on site because there will be food being served. So the health department has been involved in those coordinations. And of course, it's just it's not even a mile away from the state police station there at Pasodum. And so they've even been, of course, coordinating with state police. So a lot of jurisdictions have been involved, and they're all being paid for their time.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes. Yes, he's involved because it's a ground that I believe Atkins Group owns that he manages. We will then move on to 9 items to be recommended to the county board. Well, the way it's worded, but we have A, the proposed fiscal year 2019 RPC planning contract for Champaign County. But as I mentioned in the agenda, we aren't taking action on this. So, Mr. Hall, are you wanting to start off the discussion?
Well, I know Delitzo Sotomayor of the RPC is here, and I think and Rita Black is here, so either one of them could.
Okay. Whichever you, Delitzo or Rita or both, want to come forward. And thank you for being here.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Chairman Esri and members of the committee. Indeed, the proposed contract, the planning contract for RPC, what I wanted to do perhaps for some of the members of the committee is to provide a little bit of history as to why this contract has been with RPC, and I'm hoping Rita will rescue me if I go astray. But it is my understanding that 10 years ago, the planning and zoning used to be housed within the Regional Planning Commission, and when decision was made to move that outside of RPC, the planning contract was left with RPC. And so for the last 10 years, we have been working very closely with John and his team in providing some additional work for the county. As we were preparing our 2019 budget, and I think this has been the case for the last few years, the contract has not increased tremendously while our costs have continued to rise. And so within RPC, I think we've tried to subsidize the contract while still continuing to provide the services that are contained within the contract between RPC and the county. As we were preparing our 2019 budget and in looking at the numbers, we just felt that the shortfall is just too burdensome for us to shoulder. And we had the discussion with county administration as well as with Mr. Hull as to us perhaps not taking this contract in FY 2019. Just to share with you some specific numbers, and I'll just give the overall total numbers. For the total planning contract amount is about $87,794, and with the shortfall that I'm sharing with you, we're having to come up with about $45,000 in additional resources in order for us to cover all the expenses that are everything from personnel and other related expenses in order for us to deliver the provisions that are contained within the contract. So we apologize that this is we're pulling this when it was slated for approval. But again, for our organization, we're seeing this as really a cost burden. Now, I know that they were in discussions with both Mr. Hall as well as county administration. There were some concerns regarding some of the additional support that we're able to provide to the county from our other staff that have expertise in other areas. Our approach to that will be that we will figure out ways to work with the Planning and Zoning Department. We do have membership funds that I think the Planning and Zoning Department can use, or the county can use up to 30 hours based on the dues or fees, if you will, that are paid to RPC. And then I think beyond that, we've had conversations about how we would work out a fee for service, if you will, to cover other costs that we have been able to cover in the past. And I know that with the census coming up, that will be one of the other areas that we'll be working with the Planning and Zoning Department. So we wanted to bring this to our attention. I know that you were, I hope we're given a heads up that we would be coming before you this evening and withdrawing our request for the 2019 contract.
Thank you. So, John, do you want to say anything right now?
Well, I'll just give the committee a heads up that the work items that were in the proposed contract, which you've seen previously and was handed out in June, those work items will still need to be done. And since there will be no RPC contract for those items to be done, I will be making a request in September to the Committee of the Whole for an expansion to our staffing of 1 FTE. Now, so we will be hopefully we'll be adding 1 FTE to our department. Now, that's not like a pristine new 1,950 hours that is not already spoken for. More than half of that time is already spoken for. So this gets back to that, quarter to a half time of extra hours that I hope we'll have in 2019 to work on things like enforcement. But that you'll find out more about that in September. So I think it's too bad we're not going to have an RPC contract. I have tried to come up with any number of ways that we could keep it, but I learned that Rita and Delitzo are absolutely confident that this contract is not a good thing for the RPC. They still want to do things that we need for them to do, but this contract is just not good for the RPC. So I think if we can get the staff added to our department and continue to work with the RPC on those things that we do need their help on, I think the county might actually end up getting a better package of things completed, possibly even at a lower cost. So I think this could end up being a good thing. It just takes a lot of management right now. So,
Ms. Furtado.
So what you would essentially be proposing is in the fiscal year 2019 budget, you would be moving money from your services line to your to the personnel line. And then I just have one other question. It seemed like you were saying that the services provided by RPC will not account for the entire hours of a full person, so that would give you some time to do some flexibility. Will you still need to have some money in the services line in order to accommodate the non-personnel things? And do you think it'll be sort of a wash with what the contract was, or do you think there'll be an uptick in that?
Tammy Ogden has looked at the numbers as well as I've looked at the numbers. We're calling it budget neutral, but I think, just when you compare the numbers, the cost we're leaving $10,700 in the line item for professional services. That's not for a contract. It's just to do those things that we know we're going to need done. Now, if we use the 30 hours under membership benefits, then we won't need anywhere near 10,000. But just number-wise, that's what we have. And then we've added the cost of 1 FTE to personnel. And if you add those two things up, they end up being about $10,000 less than the $87,000 that Delitzo had described the contract being. So we call it budget neutral, but I think it's going to be a little better than that.
including benefits?
Yes.
Ms. Petrie?
I have several information questions. Thanks for coming this evening.
Thank you.
The $45,000 represents how many hours?
I'll have to defer to Rita on that one.
Right now in the contract, Susan has 1,027 hours allocated for the amount that is included in the contract. Then the 44,000 account for the remaining amount to complete the 1,950 hours. That is the regular year.
Okay, I'm not clear. So
Right now, the contract pays for 1,027 hours of Susan time.
okay, I got that.
The total amount of hours during a year is about 1950. Then the difference between 1950 and 1,027 is what is missing from the contract.
So about 900 hours,
More or less,
approximately.
approximately.
Okay, so 900 hours, and all the member agencies get are 30 hours of complimentary time.
Yes.
Okay, that doesn't, all right, that's quite a differential. I do understand the analysis that shifting that contract, the monies for that contract back into John's office does enable then an additional person. I'm glad John thinks that maybe 25% of that can be used on some of his other things. Since Stephanie is sitting here and she is chair of the Finance Committee, I still continue my argument that that doesn't negate my argument that that office still needs another person, and if not in 2019, definitely in 2020, because the engagement in the research that's going on about land banking, depending on how it evolves, and those working on it want it to evolve very positively in economic development, that will put additional workload onto the county planning office. So I don't want that to get lost as future county boards talk about budgets and things like that. And everybody knows how I felt about getting all the planning house together. So this is an unusual thing how this has unfolded. And it does give John much more flexibility as peaks and valleys come in people's workloads, and to help catch up on a lot of things. So I do hope that works out, though I do want to acknowledge, I understand organizational change does take time and adjustment.
Ms. Furtado?
Just so I make sure I'm following the conversation. So when you said 1950 is the amount of hours, isn't 2080 of an FTE? So what's the difference? Or is that 1950 are the hours that are needed to do the service? Or that's, I wasn't quite sure I was following. And then if 1950 are the hours that are needed, then how do you get to a quarter person if 2080 is a full-time person?
Yeah, I've seen that 2080 number, but I've never used the 2080. 2019 will be 1,957 and a half hours. 1950 is just that simple number you can keep in your head. Again, I've seen the 2080. It has no relevance to our department that I'm aware of.
I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding, is it like actual FTE hours, or was the 1950 the hours that were needed to do the job of this job? That was
Yeah, and 1950 is just, it's the hours that Rita and I assume an FTE will consume in a typical year. And it always varies a little bit.
Yeah.
Further discussion? And I just asking Rita, did you have anything else to add? I mean, above and beyond what DeLitzo
John and I have had several conversations this week, and he is disappointed on the fact that he will not have the services from RPC the way that he used to have. And I told him that we'll continue to work together and we'll continue to provide the support that he needs in terms of the other things that we do complementary to what Susan was doing. I'll offer that to him. I say, we are there. If you need anything, we'll be happy to help you and go from there.
Ms. Petrie?
Just for the public record, so it can be acknowledged, why don't you list a few of those supportive services that will help John, even though it's been shifted over to his office?
We do a lot of data analysis in terms of census data. We do all that work for him, and particular for the MS4 project. We also develop in-house an app to collect the data for the MS4 project, and we also created for zoning the structure of the MS4 in terms of the map and the view of the map and making the map available on GIS and on the website that John can work with that really easily. And we are working with him also on collecting that data, providing one of our interns. That's something that he will have to work out on how to keep the intern to keep collecting the data that he's using. I don't know, it's just things that come up and then he asks and we provide the service for him.
Well, I think it's also good for the public to understand the collaboration that has gone on and the technical side that you all over the years have just developed more and more. That was the reason for my question.
Yeah. And the other aspect that I would like to mention, as part of the contract, there is a portion of the contract allocated for the management of the C-Card service, the Champaign County Area Rural Transit service that we have in place. And I told John that I will find the money from other transportation contracts or other transportation projects that we have to cover that amount that he can keep it under the planning contract, use it to pay for Susan's time, and I'll continue to provide the management for that service without any problems. Yeah, exactly.
Any further discussion? Okay, well, thank you for coming here, Delitzo and Rita. And change, I'll just say change may not be easy, it may not be fun, but basically it's inevitable. And I'm confident that we'll still have a good working relationship between RPC and the county, and especially the planning and zoning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll then move on to B, draft intergovernmental agreement to share costs of Illinois EPA one-day household hazardous waste collection. Is there a motion? Moved by Ms. Petrie, seconded by Mr. Patterson. Ms. Monty?
Okay, so this week we learned that the Illinois EPA has declined to offer Champaign County an opportunity to have a one-day collection this fall and next spring. So that there's no need to consider that intergovernmental cost agreement at this time.
Mr. Weibel.
Did they say why?
Yes, apparently there are communities in the general area, they have selection protocol, and we have been waiting 6.5 years, but other communities have been waiting 15 or 20 years for their collections to take place. That's what I was told. So it's a problem statewide. Yeah, it's a systemic problem, but communities still want this to happen. So we are now still pursuing other mechanisms, other means to allow for household hazardous waste collection. And that's another thing that I work on at RPC that somehow can be accommodated in this fall. Another proposal will be coming forward to address that issue separately.
Thank you, Susan. Mr. Weibel, do we need to withdraw that motion then, or just
No action.
no action? Okay, I just wanted to
One
check.
final comment, we could make a road trip to, what is it, not Des Plaines, but there's a place in Chicago, which
Naperville is the
Naperville,
closest.
where they do have, Monday through Friday collection, but, I'm not sure how you do that.
Well, that's disappointing to say the least, but unfortunately, that's out of our hands. Thank you for that information, Susan, although it's not the most nice to receive. Any further discussion before we move on? I don't know there's as much to discuss, though, when we aren't going to have it. Okay, we'll move on then to C. We have case 895-AT-18. Amend the Champaign County zoning ordinance to add solar farm as a new principal use under the category industrial uses, electric power generating facilities, and indicate that solar farm may be authorized by a county board special use permit in the AG1 zoning district and the AG2 zoning district, add requirements and fees for solar farm, add any required definitions, and make certain other revisions to the ordinance as detailed in the full legal description. Is there such a motion? Moved by Ms. Furtado, seconded by Mr. Patterson. Discussion. John, do you want to start off?
I wanted to start off by letting you know I gave at each station a one-page memo. We did get comments from the city of Urbana. Their plan commission is reviewing this tonight. Their staff had a concern about the third paragraph related to municipal coordination. They were concerned that that could be interpreted as mandating that a municipality provide a letter. That was not my intent. I don't think the county should be mandating a letter. So I proposed this alternative language. Urbana staff said this addresses all their concerns, and you can see that it just makes some very minor changes to that language, but it does clearly establish that a municipality does not have to provide a letter or anything related to a solar farm. So in the letter the memo that was with the agenda, we gave alternatives, two different alternatives, attachment C and attachment D, and we talked about what each attachment would do. My recommendation would be to accept the changes in attachment D, but in addition to those changes, any action on this case should include this revision tonight dealing with City of Urbana concerns. The Urbana Plan Commission is seeing this memo tonight, but they don't know what action you're taking. So you're not obligated to adopt this, but I do think it's a good change, because any way that we can make our intentions more clear has to be a better ordinance. So I would recommend accepting this change.
Ms. Furtado, did you have, Go ahead.
Well, you could make it just, you could amend it, or you could accept it without objection.
Okay.
Just ask us
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
objection
Is there-
to add it on.
There you go. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Weibel. Oh, okay. Is there any objection to accepting, Ms. Petrie, this?
Not an objection per se, just an information question to make certain that this rewording does protect the county sufficiently, and has the SA gone through this wording from this perspective without having a letter from the municipalities? Do we open ourselves up as a county that after the fact the municipalities are going to come knocking on the door and say, we don't like something?
Well, someone can always sue, but I wouldn't expect that municipalities would cavalierly sue over something like that. No, I have not asked the state's attorney to review this. this is a higher level of coordination than we undertake for current special use permits within an ETJ area.
Yeah, but this is a big thing.
Well, just as we did with this text amendment, we sent a letter to those municipalities who were most concerned. So for any solar farm that's within a municipal 1.5 miles, there will be a clear documentation that we made them aware of it at the beginning, we made them aware of it when the ZBA made their recommendation, and we made them aware of it when ELUC makes their recommendation. So no one will be able to say they didn't have notice, and it's up to them to follow through.
Is the committee fine with, after that, fine with accepting it? Okay, so it looks like with no objection, we'll go ahead and accept this proposed text change. Thank you for that, John. Then, Ms. Furtado, if you had another question or comment. Go ahead.
So the one decision point that we had left with was to Stuart's point about the letter of credit. And so this ordinance does provide for the option of a letter of credit. It does not?
Attachment C and Attachment D provide for that.
Yeah.
But the draft ordinance that is attached doesn't reflect either one of those.
Okay.
So I think I'd like to see the committee take a vote on either Attachment C or Attachment D.
Okay, so we're still, okay, got you. And I wasn't sure if I was totally, I wasn't totally sure I was following how all the parts of it worked. So would that be a separate vote? Or we would vote like on a version of it? And then I have some extra questions about the language.
I think you actually should make an amendment to add one or the other.
Okay. On the Attachment D, actually, it might be on both. I see that the credit rating that is recommended is an A or AA, and in our previous conversations, we had talked about triple B rating. Was there a reason that we went with the A over the B?
Mr. Brown had provided that information that the East Coast regional operator requires this A2 ratings, and that is higher than what we discussed at the last meeting. I believe if you read the description of how the ratings company described that level of rating, it is a more, there's less risk with that rating, which is obviously why that PJM uses it. Mm-hmm. And now again, with an escrow account, there is zero risk except when you mm-hmm. go to make a draw. And with the highest credit rating, there is some risk. Mm-hmm. So going with credit ratings, you'll never get the same risk level as with an escrow, but you get away from that ability for the operator to contest a draw. Yeah. And I don't know how you compare a higher risk rating with the no risk of a disputed withdrawal. But I would say at a minimum, the ratings that we have here, that's what I would recommend at this point, just because there's always going to be some risk. By the way, I checked the ratings of the letter of credits issuer for our wind farm, and they're actually at the next higher rating.
A triple A or double A?
Double A.
Okay.
So that's good to know. I mean,
Yeah.
that makes me feel good about that letter of credit. Some would say, well, gee, then maybe you could actually put your minimum at that level since that's what you've gotten already. Mm-hmm. I'm sensitive to this being seen as too restrictive. Mm-hmm. We know that the East Coast operator uses these ratings, so I think that's good justification to go with these.
Just to clarify, John, I guess we've got C and D before us, but we could, I guess, technically just go with what it as it is without amending. I mean, just to make it clear,
yes,
if
yes.
we decided,
yeah.
we could leave it as is presented to us by the ZBA if we truly decided to.
And just to speak a little bit about what C and D are about, C modifies it such that it leaves it up to the solar farm operator. They can propose a letter of credit in lieu of an escrow account. D just says, well, let's just throw out that escrow account option, make everybody have to do a letter of credit, makes for a simpler ordinance. It does reduce flexibility, but I think it reduces it for a good reason. And sometimes flexibility really amounts to just undue complexity.
I'll just make a comment. When I say that we could leave it, I'm not suggesting that we do. I'm just pointing that out that we could. I think the committee, from the discussion we've had in the past, we're looking to do something, either C or D, so.
Based on comments at the last ZBA hearing, I believe the ZBA would have recommended probably C, simply because we hadn't spent as much time on it, but we hadn't researched bank ratings, and one of the ZBA members in particular said, well, if we had a bank rating, I would be inclined to recommend that, but we didn't have it. They were feeling the pressure of making the recommendation. That's why they made the recommendation they did.
And so following this, it looks like to me that the difference between C and D is that escrow would be optional, but then also if the bank where the financial institution where it was held, that their credit rating fell, the one option is to trigger it to switch to an escrow account, or they have to get another letter of credit, and the other is just that they have to get another letter of credit. Is that, I just want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly more than anything.
That's it in a
Okay.
nutshell.
Ms. Petrie.
A couple comments based on some of the conversations that I've had. I'm not fond of the letter of credit, but I can be convinced to go in that direction if it is the A rating. That's one thing. And the review is an annual review, so we really do put in place protections for the county.
I'm willing to do an annual review. I'm willing to report to this committee every year the ratings of the letters of credit. That's not written into the ordinance, and I don't think it needs to be in there. The way this is written, when an issuer of a letter of credit, when their rating falls below this required level, then it makes it incumbent upon the solar farm developer to provide a new letter of credit. So that's entirely within the requirements of the ordinance. It's just that it doesn't set up that annual review. It makes it a requirement in perpetuity, though.
Right, you and I had sort of touched base on that, and I'm just looking long-term in the protection of the county, because basically this is a quarter of a century project, and it'll be a downward curve in the functionality, and by that time it probably will have been sold 5, 6, 7 times. So we really have to look at, our role is to protect the county, is what I'm trying to focus on. So if we could do something like that, I could accept that, though I was very much for an escrow account, though I do understand that they can hold back on the money. So the escrow account is not necessarily a direct line to getting to the money. So I'm willing for that compromise. I wonder if I might ask Mr. Harkey a question or two. Would that be permissible now?
With no objection from the rest of the committee, we don't necessarily have to. Or do we want to handle? I mean, it's kind of up to the committee. Do we want to handle the C or D issue first?
I would suggest you deal with the C and D file first.
That kind of makes more sense to me, maybe, while we're on that topic.
In the one that has, in the C version, it does look at like it has sort of, with each incremental conversion of the letter of credit to it does have, I don't know how often that is. It might not be annually. I guess I'd have to flip to 614Q4F to figure out what that is.
The conversion happens different times depending on the quality of the panels.
Okay.
With the high-end panels with that limited warranty, the conversion happens over the 5-year period from
Okay.
year 21 to 25.
All right. So there is some, even within the, not an annual, but there is some sort of triggers for review.
But again, even under C,
Yeah.
I think it's incumbent on me to check the rating of any letter of credit, starting off from year 2. Well, we'll check it in the beginning, and then we'll check it every year after that, just to make sure.
So if we're going to tackle kind of this, does anyone want to make a motion for any one of the particular amendments, C or D? Ms. Petrie?
Oh, and I'm not ready for a motion. This leads me to revisit some of the previous conversation, and that is in respect to John's office. And in a quarter of a century, John will not be running that office. So as you're thinking through the routine of doing this checking and number of, we have no idea how many farms there will be, what do you see as the easiest approach to get it routinized so that you don't miss things and find that you don't walk into the office someday and say, whoops, I missed Solar Farm Z by that time?
Well, I think the easiest way to routinize something is to train committee members to expect to see it. So I would say January, February of.
Just be part of the work plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr.
Well, then I move as an amendment to the proposed ordinance and the friendly addition, the paragraph changes that we have D as the attachment.
Is there a second to that?
Which attachment? Which attachment?
D.
D?
Which, is
Okay.
the letter of credit only.
Okay, I would-
Ms. Furtado seconds that. Is there further discussion on that? Go ahead,
I
go
do
ahead,
just
go
have
right
one more concern, not so much for the escrow being like the option from the beginning, but are we at all worried that the sort of specter of having to set up an escrow account means that the people would be more proactive if their financial institutions' credit rating slipped to get a different letter of credit? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, is the escrow account a stick to make them actually do it? I mean, what is the mechanism by which if the financial institution's bond rating slips, we say we have to get them another letter? How do we make, you know what I'm saying? What is the penalty if they don't?
Well, if they don't get a different letter of credit, they default and we draw against the letter of credit we have.
Okay. So that would be the penalty. I just want to make sure that that we were not, I know one of the conversations we had in finances, in our finance meeting was about how do we, make sure, like to your point, how do we not just monitor it, but then if we find out that, oh, it did fall, what is the timeline for them to have to get the new letter? Is it by the next quarter? Is it, that kind of?
Well, that's a good question, Stephanie. I don't have a good answer to that. With the California Ridge, we took more than 2 years to do something that should have been done immediately. It's exactly like our enforcement cases.
Yeah.
You tell someone to change their behavior.
Yeah.
You give them 3 weeks with 2 notices. Well, I need a little more time.
Yeah.
You send the notice to the state's attorney's office. They're still working on it. So
I mean, I personally like the language where it's just like, it shall be replaced. There is no, it's just like, you're going to replace it. There's no, you know what I mean? Because, I mean, that makes you be able to be like the next day to be like, did you? You know what I mean? Like, there's no, it's not like you got 6 months or anything like that. So I'm not against that, like there not being like a by quarter thing or anything. I just want to make sure that there was a mechanism to make them do it.
Well, and here's where, we need good support from the state's attorney's office. I was prepared to draw against California Ridge this past year for that very reason. The cool level head of the state's attorney's office said, no, let's not do that. Let's work with them. and just, make it a little more harsh and just keep making it more harsh. So this takes, it takes a lot of good management and involvement of your state's attorney's office, because the poor zoning administrator, I'm going to opt for the hard, quick, sure thing, which may end up being a bad idea.
Well, I probably should have asked that question before I seconded the motion, but the answer satisfied me, so I'm glad I stand by my second of the motion. I'm with this, I forward on.
Point of order, you cannot withdraw seconds.
I want to add to the conversation when I talked to our county treasurer about these concepts and how he would view it from that, his role or her role, whoever is treasurer along these 25 years, that he would like to see everything as a letter of credit. And from that, I'm not committing the role of the treasurer, but I took my senses, I took away from the conversation that it would be good to have the county treasurer as part of the trigger mechanism for the report and things like that. And the present county treasurer indicated that a willingness to do so, because in the long term, that individual realized that's in a protection for the county. So you can go ask John if that's what he really said,
I guess I'll just throw out about the seconding. There'd be nothing wrong with seconding something just so that you could discuss it, even if, just obviously a second normally means you support it, but you could second it for
Actually, no, a second technically just bring it to the floor for discussion.
It's just,
it does not imply you support it. Actually, you could make a motion that you don't support and bring it to the floor.
it's mainly just.
It does not mean you necessarily support
It normally indicates it, is all I'm saying. It normally does, but just saying. So any further discussion on this? The motion is to amend it by adopting the D attachment. That we've already adopted with no objection. This is just to amend it, not for the final vote. So if we're ready to vote on that, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes unanimously. So we have attachment D, so we're all right to the letter of credit only. So further discussion, we're back to the main motion as amended now. Ms. Petrie. And that's, if there's no objection, we don't have to suspend the rules, Mr. Patterson, at this. But if you have Mr. Harkey, if you're willing to come back forward. Once you get seated, go ahead, Ms. Petrie.
Okay, I have a couple of information questions on what you shared with us this evening. You mentioned that Iroquois County has put in place even more stringent guidelines than we are discussing.
Yes.
Have they done this before anybody has approached that county to put in place a solar farm? Or are they in a similar situation as we are, where there are some that have been submitted and we're working on stabilizing and passing an overall ordinance?
In Iroquois County, the reason they put in the 30 nighttime dBA noise limit and the 35 daytime dBA noise limit was in reaction to complaints to noise for sleep issues. In fact, one of the county board members themselves experienced sleep problems 1 mile from wind turbines, and they got some acousticians to give them advice on what to do, and they were told to put in 30 and 35, and that would be sufficient to make sure wind companies did not cause problems for neighbors.
But you haven't answered my question. My question is, do they have some companies that have come in and have indicated an interest? Are the stricter guidelines of turning companies away from submitting request to develop a solar farm?
I have no idea about anyone coming to them for solar farms in Iroquois County. I don't know.
Well, the work that they're doing is an ordinance before the fact, not in the middle
Yes,
of the fact.
they currently have an ordinance of 30 and 35 now because of the wind farm, and I think that Iroquois County passed that. I think they did it in 2013. That was before any solar farms were coming anywhere.
Okay, and then you talk about means and ways of camouflaging
Yes.
the noise. I did go out to the university's solar farm, and indeed it is noisy. And I did walk into the corn and soybean field that's across from the road, and how far you have to go into that field before the noise is really lowered and mitigated. How much additional expense is it to box in the noisemaker? That's number one. And number two, I didn't think there was any noise generated at night.
There isn't. Of course, there's no noise generated at night. My reaction to the problem is that people are still asleep in their beds at 6 o'clock in the morning. And during previous testimony, one of the developers testified that he needed to have 45 dBA at 6 o'clock in the morning for when the sun comes up and starts to hit the solar panels. So when I heard that, that very much alarmed me, because at 45 dBA, that's about the noise limit measurement that the wind turbines had at my house in Vermilion County when we abandoned it. So at 45, I left my house because of that. And I don't think it's fair to let 45 happen to citizens in Champaign County at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that would take away your ability to sleep in every day that it's sunny about 200 days a year. So to address your question about how expensive it would be to put up a panel around an inverter, I think it would be very easy that a piece of wood fence could simply take care of that. I think maybe in the magnitude of a few $100s worth of material would totally take care of it. That's one of my frustrations, is that this is 100% predictable and 100% avoidable, that it can be fixed.
Okay, clarification question from John. Isn't the distance now that's in the ordinance 550 feet? Am I remembering correctly?
It's a minimum of 515 feet, yeah.
15 or 50?
515.
15 feet, okay, so that differential. A couple of information questions. You may or may not know the answers to this. Is I've been reading about solar power, a couple of interesting advances that seem to be right there on the horizon are sheeting that can be put on windows, which in essence, based on what I've read, will generate sufficient energy for an individual home. Is there any accuracy to what I've been reading?
I'm sure you could put any kind of a solar panel on the face of any surface.
No, it isn't a solar panel. It's a sheet that goes over the window.
Okay, and it's to make electricity?
It generates solar power.
Okay.
So you don't know about that?
I've never heard of that.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all?
Yep. Anybody else while Mr. Harkey's back up at the microphone? Seeing none. Yep, I believe that's all. Thank you, Mr. Harkey. Anyone else want to ask either Mr. Brown or Ms. McElroy-Smetzer?
Well, I'll ask those technical questions of Mr. Brown. And
Okay,
see if
Mr.
he-
Brown, if you're willing to step forward again, have a seat.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Patsy.
Are you acquainted with the solar sheeting that I've been reading about that you can put on your windows, which in essence, from what I've been reading, will generate sufficient electricity or power to sustain a single home?
Sure, I'm not familiar with the exact product that you're talking about, but what you're saying is they have products now that you can, it's a film, basically a thin film. You
Right.
can apply it to pretty much any surface. Could be a window, could be on, they They have some that go on tiles that go on roofs, so that way it's integrated.
Right, I
into
know
the tiles.
about,
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's the
Elon
same
Musk.
concept. It's the same concept, but I mean, you'd be able to get whatever energy that you would be produced on the wall that's facing the sun at the time of the day that it's doing. So, is it a financeable product that is widely available? I doubt it. It's probably more of an R&D type of application, but it's a revolution. You know, the industry's revolutionary and things are changing every day. So
Yeah, they
one day
are.
you may find that it could be just a window you buy at Home Depot. So.
Okay. And are you acquainted with the solar flower?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions while Mr. Brown's back at the microphone?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just step in here real quick. Mr. Levy, to your comments about the streets, there is a differentiation in the ordinance that the community solar farms are basically waived, or well, I'll let Mr. Hall explain it. Explain it better.
The ordinance allows the relevant highway jurisdiction to waive the road use agreement for community solar farms. So it's up to that highway jurisdiction. So.
Yeah, I was getting it confused in my head, but for the smaller community size, which are limited to 20 acres in size, the highway commissioner, township highway commissioner can say, hey, we're not worried about those roads that they're going to be using, so they don't need to have an agreement with us. So it's largely addressed. I mean, the bigger ones, yes, they are going to have an agreement. The smaller ones, the highway commissioner can say, it's not a problem. Go ahead and just do it. So.
That's exactly how it works. When the solar farm developer has to contact the highway commissioner and talk to the highway commissioner and, answer any concerns that he has. And that's exactly what they're doing. We're dealing with those calls right now.
Any further discussion on the ordinance as a whole? Ms. Metzer, McElroy Smetzer, did you have anything else you wanted to say above and beyond, since we've given the other public participation people time to come forward?
Just that I would ask that you think about and I think it's probably a done deal by now, but I don't agree that you can regulate the sound necessarily by the size. When I talked to Mr. Herkey, he said he had loud noises at his farm and he put hay bales in front and it cut the sound. I would think that if we're going to go ahead and put the solar panels on in place, let's get as many as we can and get the most benefit for it. So I would say we need to judge the efficiency of it, not necessarily distance. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be. And I agree with him. I don't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I don't want, even though I can't hear very much, I don't want to have a constant noise in the background. I think that there are better ways of regulating the sound than necessarily a setback.
Thank you. Just while you're there, any questions for her? Thank you.
Thanks.
So we've already added the attachment D as an amendment. Is there anything else the committee wants to change? Or are we ready to vote on it, or further comments? Ms. Petrie?
Well, I will support it to go to the county board with the caveat that it not be on the consent agenda, assuming I will be supporting it. But I do want to get on the record that I'm still a little concerned that the distance isn't sufficient. We're probably not going to change it this evening, but I do think it's important to do some testing within a year after both the smaller size and the larger size farms are established and up and running, to see in fact if there will be some need for adjusting these criteria after a period of time. We don't know. We're not out in the environment, so laying out that caveat for future.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. And I guess I was kind of figuring that we would keep it off the consent. This is a big enough step for the county as a whole. I mean, even if we were a full 7-member ELEC committee and everyone on the ELEC committee voted for it, it's a big enough step for the county that at least needs to come before the county. Whether or not anybody chooses to discuss it at the county board, we'll find out, but I imagine we will. But so I have no problem with keeping it off of the consent. Are we ready to vote? No, Mr. Patterson.
So if we were to change the ordinance in the future, would that grandfather in previous license that we've given out?
Further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Thank you. That passes unanimously here, but as mentioned, we will keep it off the consent. And although we haven't fully passed it as a county yet, we did have earlier, they stepped back out. They probably had something else, but I'll just mention that we had 2 members of the ZBA in here earlier, Ms. Deb Greist and Ryan Elwell. And I'd just like to thank them, the rest of the ZBA board members, John Hall and his staff, Susan especially, Bergstrom, but all their staff, I know. And it has not been an easy process, which it probably shouldn't be an easy process. And I also just like to thank the audience, the people in the audience, Mr. Brown and Mr. Harkey and Ms. McElroy Smetzer. Appreciate all the work that's gone into it. So that's done. We'll then move on to the monthly reports with no objection, unless anybody has, Ms. Petrie.
I have a couple of comments, which I've already shared with John. He was apologizing that he hadn't submitted them on a monthly basis due to other things in his office. And my comment to him, actually, it was great because it made the comparison so easy to look at the workload and things of that. And it's wonderful documentation for the Finance Committee as to the need level in that office when you look at the data related to the things before that office and them not being able to get them completed month by month by month. When I say that, it's not a criticism of the office, it's actually a factual thing, and it does indicate staffing is an important variable in that office.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. But I'll go ahead and read them in. We have before us, of course, the November monthly reports, the November 2017, December 2017, January 2018, February 2018, March 2018, April 2018, May 2018, and June 2018 reports. With no objection, we'll accept those and place them on file. Is there any further discussion on those?
No.
Seeing none, we'll then move on to other business. Is there any other business that needs to come before? I was just going to maybe ask John a quick question. I didn't think to mention this before. With the Sydney property, the former Bryant Trucking, any idea just how that might be progressing? If not, that's fine. But
I saw Supervisor Osterber in the clerk's office the other day, and they've done a lot of work already. I haven't had the pleasure to drive by and see how it's changed. Oh, that would be a pleasure.
Okay.
But they have gotten a lot of things done so far, and I think they're finding that it's indeed taking a lot more work than they had imagined, but I think they're absolutely convinced it's the right thing to do.
Oh,
so.
yes.
Oh, I'm sure it's the right thing to do. I just wondered if you had heard anything. So thank you for that. With no other business, I have no chair's report. Designation of items to be placed on consent agenda. Nothing. Yep. Because we had A and B were basically non-action, and C were keeping it off consent. So with that, with no objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.